What is this junk? I didn't expect anything better from your poor farmer family. With disgust, my mother-in-law threw my parents' gift on the floor. I simply looked over at the guest of honor, my husband's boss, who suddenly frowned and slowly rose from the table. But before we go on, tell me where you're watching this from. Enjoy the story. Elizabeth would never forget the day she first saw Victoria Anderson's house. It loomed over the Vermont countryside like an unapproachable fortress, a symbol of power and untouchable wealth. Back then, Elizabeth was just a naive girl from a small town, and she could never have imagined she'd one day become part of that world, even if only as the daughter-in-law. Andrew, Victoria Anderson's son, had seemed like a real-life prince to her, handsome, well-educated, polished like someone from the big city. Elizabeth, a modest literature teacher, couldn't believe her luck when he proposed. She loved him with all her heart, blind to the shadow in his eyes, the hesitation that betrayed just how deeply he depended on his mother. The wedding was lavish, like everything Victoria Anderson touched. Guests, designer outfits, gourmet food, everything screamed status and wealth. Elizabeth felt out of place, like Cinderella at the ball. But Andrew was by her side. His smile gave her strength. Then the honeymoon ended, and real life began. That's when the true Victoria Anderson came out. From the very first day, she made it clear Elizabeth wasn't good enough. Every gesture, every word, dripped with contempt for her small-town background. "Andrew, why would you marry this plain girl?" Victoria once said casually, as if joking, but Elizabeth heard every word. That was the first blow, but far from the last. Victoria never missed a chance to criticize her. She didn't like how Elizabeth ran the household, or how she dressed, or that she loved literature, which Victoria dismissed as a pointless hobby. "You should do something useful instead of reading all day," she'd sneer. What bothered Victoria the most, though, was Elizabeth's upbringing. She constantly brought up her rural roots, like it was some kind of incurable flaw. "What do you expect from a country girl? They've got their own ideas of manners," she'd tell her friends right in front of Elizabeth, not even trying to hide it. Elizabeth tried to ignore her mother-in-law's barbs. She loved Andrew and hoped that, in time, Victoria would warm up to her. But time passed, and nothing changed. In fact, Victoria's disdain only grew more obvious, poisoning Elizabeth's daily life. Andrew, sadly, didn't stand up for his wife. He was too attached to his mother, too afraid of her anger. "She doesn't mean anything by it. Just ignore her," he'd say. But that only made it worse for Elizabeth. She felt alone and defenseless in that huge, unfamiliar house. One day, Victoria hosted a formal dinner. The guests were all high-profile, influential people. Elizabeth tried to stay in the background, but Victoria made sure to drag her into the spotlight. "Everyone, meet my daughter-in-law, Elizabeth. Straight from the sticks, you might say. But don't worry, we'll get her polished up," Victoria said. The guests responded with strained, awkward laughter. Elizabeth felt her face burn with shame. She was humiliated. In the evenings, when Andrew was at work, Elizabeth was left alone with her thoughts. She often thought of her childhood home, her parents, the modest but warm and loving life they led. There, she was appreciated. There, she felt like she mattered. Her parents, hardworking and kind, tried to support her from afar. They knew she was hurting, but they didn't want to interfere in her marriage. They believed in her strength and her ability to handle the hardships. Whenever they visited, Victoria would greet them with a forced smile and make sure to highlight the gap between them. She'd put expensive wines and fancy hors d'oeuvres on the table like she was showing off what they could never afford. Elizabeth's parents tried to ignore her behavior. They had been raised to respect their elders and didn't want to start a conflict. All they wanted was for their daughter to be happy. One day, Elizabeth's father, Charles Milton, decided to give Victoria a gift. He was a skilled woodworker and handcrafted a photo frame for her. It was delicate and beautiful, with fine carvings and inlaid patterns. Elizabeth was thrilled with the gift. She knew Victoria had a taste for beautiful things and hoped she would appreciate the craftsmanship. She imagined her mother-in-law complimenting her father's work, and maybe, just maybe, the ice between them would start to melt. But her hopes were quickly crushed. Victoria didn't even glance at the frame. She just curled her lip and said, "What is this tasteless thing? I already have plenty of expensive decor, I don't need some rustic trinket." Elizabeth felt her heart sink. She was hurt for her father, who had poured his soul into that gift. And she was ashamed of a mother-in-law who couldn't recognize the value of something made with love. As always, Andrew stayed silent. He lowered his eyes and pretended nothing had happened. That's when Elizabeth understood she was completely alone in this fight. Alone against a cold, arrogant woman. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She lay in bed crying, her heart heavy with pain and humiliation. She didn't understand why Victoria Anderson hated her so much. She kept hearing her words about country roots, wondering if maybe she really wasn't good enough for Andrew. Maybe she should just walk away, spare him, and herself. But then she remembered Andrew's love. His warm hugs. His gentle words. She couldn't imagine life without him. She loved him with every fiber of her being and was willing to endure anything for his sake. So Elizabeth made a decision: she would fight. She would prove to Victoria Anderson that she was just as good as anyone else. That she was worthy of being Andrew's wife. That she deserved respect. She didn't know how she'd do it, but she was determined. It wouldn't be easy, but she believed in herself and in her love. Someday, she thought, Victoria would see her not as some small-town nobody, but as a woman worthy of her son. Guests from all over the region came to celebrate Victoria Anderson's birthday. The house was overflowing with showy luxury. Crystal chandeliers reflected the light of hundreds of candles. Tables were piled high with delicacies, and waiters in white gloves weaved between guests offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. To Elizabeth, who'd grown up in a humble, cozy apartment, it all felt like a scene from someone else's life, something distant and unattainable. She felt out of place in her new dress, which seemed to scream provincial next to the designer outfits of the other women. Andrew, as always, stood nearby, but his presence brought no comfort. It was like he was afraid to even look at her, terrified that one glance might invite his mother's wrath. Elizabeth understood his fear, but that didn't make it hurt any less. She longed for a kind word, a reassuring touch, but Andrew kept hiding behind a mask of polite detachment. When Elizabeth's parents arrived, it felt like a breath of fresh air. They came quietly, without fanfare, but their faces radiated love and pride. Her father, Charles Milton, a strong man with kind eyes, carried a carefully wrapped bundle. Her mother, Margaret, hugged Elizabeth tightly and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're here for you." Those simple words warmed Elizabeth's heart and gave her strength. Her parents looked around awkwardly, trying not to draw attention. Victoria gave them a quick, dismissive glance and turned away as if they didn't exist. Elizabeth felt a wave of anger rise in her chest, but she held it in. She didn't want to cause a scene. Then came the moment for gift-giving. Guests presented Victoria with expensive jewelry, antique vases, and luxury vacation packages. She accepted them with a smug smile, clearly evaluating the price tags. When it was Elizabeth's turn, she stepped forward nervously. "This is from my parents and me, Mrs. Anderson," she said softly, offering the bundle. Charles carefully unwrapped it, revealing a handcrafted wooden jewelry box. He had spent months making it, carving every detail with care. On the lid was a peaceful landscape, fields, birch trees, and a quiet stream. The wood still smelled fresh, radiating warmth. It wasn't just a gift, it was a piece of a man's heart, a symbol of love and respect. Victoria gave the box a quick, disgusted look. Her face twisted in contempt. "What is this?" she said coldly. Elizabeth hesitated. "It's a jewelry box, Mrs. Anderson. My father made it. He put a lot of effort into it." "Effort?" Victoria mocked. "And what am I supposed to do with this?" Keep my real jewelry in it. I have actual works of art for that. She pushed the box aside like it was trash. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn with shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her parents stood beside her, heads bowed, humiliated. It's a family heirloom, Charles said quietly, trying to maintain his dignity. We hoped it could become part of your family. A family heirloom? Victoria burst out laughing. Our family already has heirlooms, real ones. Not this country junk. She glanced around the room, clearly enjoying the attention. A stunned silence fell. No one knew how to react. Andrew stood frozen, speechless. Elizabeth felt the world collapsing around her. Suddenly, a firm voice broke the silence. Excuse me, Mrs. Anderson, but I can't stay quiet any longer. All eyes turned to Robert Harrison, Andrew's boss. He rose from his seat and looked at Victoria Anderson with open contempt. I find your behavior completely unacceptable, Robert said calmly. You didn't just insult Elizabeth and her parents, you disrespected every hardworking person who creates beautiful things with their own two hands. I won't tolerate that kind of attitude in my circle. Victoria Anderson's face turned pale with rage. And who are you to tell me how to act in my own home? She hissed. I'm someone who values decency and fairness, Robert replied. And I won't stand by while you belittle people just because they don't match your narrow idea of wealth and class. Andrew, I hope you understand what I mean. He shot a sharp glance at Andrew, who stood with his head down. Then Robert turned to Elizabeth and her parents. I want to apologize for Victoria Anderson's behavior, he said. Please don't judge all of us by her actions. That jewelry box is a beautiful gift. I'm sure it will bring warmth and meaning to any family. And just so you know, Mrs. Anderson, my family's from a farm too. And I'm proud of it. Andrew, I'll see you in my office tomorrow. We'll talk about your future. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Victoria Anderson frozen in fury and humiliation. The guests stepped aside silently, unwilling to break the tense quiet. Elizabeth watched him go, filled with gratitude and a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, the house was wrapped in a heavy, almost suffocating silence, so different from the loud laughter and extravagant spectacle of the birthday party. Elizabeth woke with a knot in her stomach, bracing for the storm she knew was coming. Robert Harrison's words wouldn't go unanswered. Andrew was quiet and sullen over breakfast. He nervously fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth, avoiding Elizabeth's eyes. Victoria Anderson didn't come down for breakfast, highly unusual. Normally, she ruled the mornings like a warden, barking orders at the staff and handing out sharp remarks about everyone's appearance and behavior. Around 10 o'clock, Andrew got a call to come into the office. Elizabeth walked him to the door, her nerves tightening by the second. He didn't hug her goodbye, just gave a brief nod and rushed out to the car. The day dragged on painfully. Elizabeth tried to busy herself with chores, but nothing went right. She kept going to the window, watching cars pass, hoping one of them would bring Andrew back. He finally returned in the evening. His face was pale and drawn. Without a word, he walked straight into his study. Elizabeth followed, knocking gently on the door. Andrew? What happened? She asked softly as she stepped inside. He was sitting at his desk, staring blankly. After a long sigh, he looked up at her. His eyes were tired, filled with frustration. I had a meeting with Robert Harrison, he said flatly. It didn't go well. Not at all. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the couch, trying to stay calm. What did he say? He scolded me. Told me my behavior last night was disgraceful. That I didn't stand up for my wife, that I let my mother humiliate her family. Elizabeth lowered her eyes. It hurt to hear, but she wasn't surprised. She knew Andrew lacked the strength to confront his mother. He said it would affect my career, Andrew continued. I've been demoted. Temporarily, but it's all because of you, Elizabeth. The last words landed like a slap. Elizabeth flinched. Because of me? Andrew, I didn't ask you for anything. I just wanted your mother to accept me. You should have known that would never happen. Andrew snapped. You've seen what she's like. Why did you have to bring that stupid box? Why humiliate all of us like that? Elizabeth felt a lump rise in her throat. She fought to hold back tears. It was a gift from my parents, Andrew. They made it with love. I thought maybe it could soften her heart. You always make things complicated, Elizabeth, he muttered, turning away from her. Always. Elizabeth stood. She couldn't stay in that room a second longer. She couldn't breathe in that air thick with blame and disappointment. She walked out and quietly closed the door behind her. Later at dinner, Victoria Anderson sat in silence, shooting Elizabeth occasional looks filled with contempt. Andrew didn't say a word either. The tension at the table was so thick, it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. In the days that followed, things around the house began to change. Victoria was no longer invited to the events and meetings involving Andrew's company. Her influence in the family started to fade. She became more withdrawn, bitter, and irritable. Elizabeth could feel the growing distance between her and Andrew. He stayed late at work more often, avoided conversations, and had started sleeping in the guest room. She knew their marriage was falling apart. One morning, Elizabeth found a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope looked familiar. It was from Robert Harrison. Her heart began to race. With trembling hands, she opened it and started reading. In the letter, Robert expressed his support for Elizabeth and her family. He wrote that he had been deeply moved by their kindness and sincerity. He also mentioned that he had heard about her father's woodcarving talent and wanted to offer him a chance to collaborate on a new project. Elizabeth read the letter over and over, barely believing what she was seeing. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt hope return to her soul. That same day, her father received a phone call. He was offered a job at a large company that specialized in handcrafted furniture and interior design. His talent had finally been recognized. Elizabeth called him right away to congratulate him. She heard the joy and excitement in his voice. He was thrilled that his work was finally being appreciated. Elizabeth realized that justice does exist. Maybe not always right away, but eventually, it comes. Kindness and talent always find their place in the world. She looked at herself in the mirror. The sadness and hopelessness that had haunted her for months were gone from her eyes. She felt strength and confidence rising inside her. She understood that her worth had nothing to do with wealth or status. It was rooted in dignity and humanity. Elizabeth's story didn't end with some fairy tale happily ever after. Her relationship with Andrew remained strained, and Victoria Anderson still treated her with cold disregard. But Elizabeth no longer felt like a victim. She knew she had her family's love, her father's talent, and a belief in what was right. She had learned that it's important to stay true to yourself, no matter the situation. To treasure the people who truly care, and never let anyone make you feel small. It's worth standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible. Elizabeth decided to live her own life, help her father with his new project, and find her own happiness. She would no longer let anyone else shape her fate. She would forge it herself, step by step, day by day. And she believed she could do it. Because she had something no one could take from her, faith in herself, and in the power of goodness. And that was enough to overcome anything.